All right, everyone, good evening. We're going to go ahead and get started tonight. My name is Kathy Hart, and I'm going to be presenting tonight's first part of our webinar titled Acing the PSAT. First of all, before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping for you. All right, so just accessing the handouts, and we have 3 of them available tonight. These same 3 will be available on Thursday night's math session. So you're just going to look for the GoToWebinar control panel in the upper right corner of your screen, and you're going to click the plus next to the handouts. And then this section will expand and you'll click on the handouts you'd like to download and enjoy. So we've got a couple of information more about the SAT and the ACT. And we also have the PSAT that you will be using this evening. Hold on, let's see, one second. Let's see. And then if you are having any audio difficulties, try calling into the webinar. If you click the plus next to audio, then select phone call and follow the dial-in instructions that appear after selecting phone call. That way, if there are any audio difficulties, you should be able to hear me this way as well. Let me see, it looks like I have a question. Let me just check. Let's see, any visual. Can you not see, hold on one second, I see Josh. If you're asking for visual, I have just the slide deck, but none of me. Does that answer your question? Let's see. So just to make sure you can see the slideshow, but no, I don't have my camera on. And can you hear me okay as well too before I start going? Okay, let's see. Let me just check here. So right now you should be able to see instructions on how to download and print an actual PSAT, which we're going to be doing a little bit later in the presentation. Tonight you are going to answer questions in 1 to 2 sections of an actual PSAT, and we'll review the answers during tonight's presentation. And then links to the test, answer sheet, and scoring guide are listed under the information for this webinar on our website, scoreathetop.com, webinars. And also there should be in the handouts, you should be able to access the PSAT as well too. Let's see. And then it looks like we're having difficulty accessing the PowerPoint. Let me take a peek here. Let me just try this. Hold on one second. And can everyone see my screen now? Where it says download and print the actual PSAT. All right, thank you. All right, sorry about that. My bad. All right, so the screen's okay. Yes, and I was muted for just a minute. Okay, so perfect. So you can see, download, and print the actual SAT. My apologies. All right, let me just close this up. Great, thanks guys. All right, let's go ahead and we'll get started. Okay, so you really didn't miss much at the beginning. It was just to make sure on your GoToWebinar screen that you can download right here now you can see you can download and print the actual PSAT. That's also available as a handout as well underneath in the download section. All right, so there I am. Hi guys, thanks for your patience, and I'm glad you can see my screen. Just to give you a little background about myself, I've been working for Score at the Top for a number of years, since mid-2013. I serve many roles in our company, have been doing test prep tutoring with a focus on reading and writing for the SAT, PSAT, and ACT. I also teach high school English, including AP level courses, and my other role is serving as an educational consultant, specializing in college admissions, the application process, and essays as well too. My background is in Spanish originally. Many years ago, I started out as a Spanish teacher, switched over to English following getting my master's in creative writing at Antioch. The presenter for tomorrow night is going to be Eileen Kent, excuse me, not tomorrow night, Thursday evening, and she will guide you through the math portion of the PSAT. All right, I see, let me just check here, just so we see, we've got one question before, let's see. I don't understand what we're doing. We are going through the PSAT, so that's our focus for tonight. All right, so let's get started. All right, so first of all, what is the PSAT? So the PSAT is a nickname, so when you see your test next Wednesday, you're going to see these two acronyms appear on there, these two abbreviations. So the PSAT, which stands for Preliminary SAT, and the National Merit Scholarship Qualifying Test. The sponsors of this program are both College Board, who produces the PSAT, SAT, AP tests, etc., and the National Merit Scholarship Corporation. So why do you want to take the PSAT? So why put in the time to prepare for this? First and foremost, and actually the most important reason why, is to get ready for your SAT, which if you're a junior currently, you will likely take in school in March. Some of you may have decided you're going to take it on your own during a national test date, possibly before or after. And the PSAT is also going to give you a good idea, a good prediction of what your SAT scores might be. And then it'll also reveal areas of strengths and weaknesses. You'll see college readiness scores appear on your score sheet. And this also will give you the time now to fill in any of those gaps. Do you need to improve a little bit more in reading? Need to improve a little bit more in writing or in math? For the juniors, it's the only way currently to qualify for the National Merit Scholarship Competition. I'll talk a little bit about that process in just a moment. And also it's a great way to get on all sorts of mailing lists and start receiving tons of information from colleges. How do the PSAT and SAT compare? So the PSAT is composed of old SAT questions. It is shorter in time, it has fewer questions, and it does not have an essay. Just to look at this little graphic just to see how they compare. Reading is 60 minutes, 47 questions. Writing and language is 35 minutes with 44 questions. And then you've got your math, 2 sections of 25 minutes, no calc, 45 minutes with a calculator. And just comparing them side by side with the SAT, you'll notice that the SAT is a little longer. We're focusing on the verbal sections tonight. So the reading is 5 minutes longer and is 52 questions total. But the writing and language, virtually the same, time-wise and number of questions. There's also a slightly longer math with calculator section and a few more questions on the math. PSAT isn't used in your college admissions process. Colleges will not see it, but it can help you predict how well you're going to do on the SAT and even help you determine, is the SAT the best test for you, especially if you're possibly considering an ACT. The SAT and the ACT in most instances are the second most important factor in college admissions behind course rigor and grades. Just to give you an overview here of how the PSAT is scored, they have a similar score scale, but because the PSAT is less difficult and shorter, the PSAT scores use a lower scale. So your range on your SAT for your verbal and your math sections is a 200 to 800 score. On your PSAT, it's going to be a slightly lower range. So the top score would be 760. And the lowest score would be 160. And that would be for each section. So you get a 160 to 760 score for your math, and then a 160 to 760 score for your combined reading and writing. And then you'll get a breakout. So this is when you get your score report. You'll get quite a bit of data. What most students are concerned with most are what we call the two-section scores. So the evidence-based reading and writing, which is one of the 160 to 760 scale scores. And then the other is going to be the math. And that's the combined calculator, no calculator. Then you're going to get a breakdown of the individual reading, writing and language and math scores. And you're going to get those on an 8 to 38 scale. So you have a raw score, and then the raw score is converted over into a scale score. Then you're going to get all sorts of really fantastic and interesting information about how your tests fit into different areas of study. So you'll get cross-test scores based on science, based on social science. You'll get a breakdown of the scores on the verbal parts of the test, the reading and the writing, about words and context and command of evidence questions. We're going to look at those sorts of questions a little bit more closely as we go through this evening. Just a quick snapshot. U.S. News and World Report just published, came out in September 2019, and this is the mid-range 50% scores for the SAT and ACT. And then at Florida's 12 state universities, here is the breakdown of mid 50% SAT compared to mid 50% ACT. All right, so moving on, and just quickly before I go through, there is a lot of information that I'm sharing this evening. I know I'm moving rather quickly. You will have access to a recording of this webinar. So if you missed any of the slides, or if I went a little quickly through some places, rest assured you will get access to this webinar, recording of this webinar. So let's just look at the steps in the National Merit Scholarship Competition. I'm just going to go through this pretty quickly. And this is for my juniors taking the PSAT. So in October, there's going to be 1.5 million junior test takers. In April, 50,000 are going to qualify for recognition. So that's when they're notified about qualifying for recognition for the scholarship. And then September of their senior year, there will be 34,000 commended students, and then 16,000 semifinalists. Then February, 15,000 finalists will be notified. And of those 15,000 finalists, there will be 8,400 merit scholarship winners notified in March of senior year. So you can see how you start with a very large pool of 1.5 million, which gradually works its way down to just under 9,000 actual scholarship winners. All right, so here's how you calculate your selection index, which is what determines if you become a semifinalist. So what you're going to do is you're going to take the scale score. So this isn't the raw score. This is a scale score that you'll see on your PSAT score report. And you're going to add the 3 scale scores together. So the reading test score, which will be 8 to 38, the writing and language test score, 8 to 38, and then the math test score of 8 to 38. You're going to double the sum, and the highest possible index, so the highest possible score that you can get would be 228. And just to give you an idea of where we fall, of where Florida falls, so for the class of 2020, the National Merit Semifinalist cutoff is 219. So in order to be considered for National Merit Semifinalists, you will need to get this score or above. All right, so let's move into test taking strategies and talk about some things that you need to know in order to be successful on the PSAT. So I'm going to talk about two overall test taking strategies, guessing and pacing, and then we'll go into specific ones for reading. All right. So for guessing, especially for my sophomores that are taking this test for the first time, if you hadn't taken it in 8th or 9th grade, what's great about your SAT is that there are no penalties for wrong answers. So you always want to guess, never leave one of the circles on your bubble sheet unanswered. Of course, an educated guess is always better than a wild guess. So certainly if you can use power of elimination and narrow down your answers to 1 or 2, then that's always a good idea to do. Pacing. So it's important to just keep in mind the timing of the test. You have 60 minutes for reading, in which you'll be reading and answering 5 passages, 47 questions. And in the writing section, you got 35 minutes for 4 passages. And it's a generous amount of time, but you always want to keep in mind that you do need to keep moving on. And so the first rule is, focus on those easy questions, because unlike a test in school where you might get more points if you answer a more complex question, on the PSAT, an easy question is worth the same as a hard one. And so do all the questions that are easy for you. That's really going to depend on what your strengths are when it comes to reading and writing. Don't get stuck. This is always one that sometimes students will get a little bit stuck, that they really want to answer this one vocabulary and context question, or they might be thinking of this logical order question on the writing test, and they slow down and they get stuck. So never spend, if you find yourself spending more than a good minute on one of these questions, keep moving on. Take a guess and move on. Always leave a thinking trail so you know what you're doing. If you are guessing, mark it. Here you can use a little question mark so you know if I have some time, I'm going to come back. As I'm eliminating answer choices, I will cross them out using, just some sort of little slash or some sort of, I like to use a little X on my test booklet, and that tells me that I've eliminated this answer choice. So if I need to make an educated guess, I will. You want to complete each section in 2 passages, and this is good for our 2 passage-based tests. So first what you're going to do is you're going to go through, let's say, read the first reading passage. You'll go through the first time and you'll answer all the questions that are easy for you. Before you move on, you want to return to the questions where you guessed. Remember, you never leave any blank. And if you have time, you look for careless mistakes. You'll do another attempt at some of the ones that you guessed. Go through, do a quick check, starting at question 1, ending at question 9, 10, or 11, depending how many questions there are for the passage, and then you'll move on. Always periodically check your answer sheet. Make sure when you are answering question 1, you are marking the bubble sheet on question 1. Do this periodically, maybe every 10, 15 questions, just to make sure you don't accidentally answer a question in the wrong number. And then always, of course, work at a steady pace. So, not trying to rush through it just because you want to get done, but also not taking too much time. So you give yourself enough time to try every question on that section of the PSAT. All right, so moving on to our reading test. So there's quite a number of strategies here. So we're just gonna take them piece by piece and go from there. All right, so first of all, let's just look at what our reading test is comprised of. So you're gonna get 60 minutes. and you're going to answer 5 passages. And they're going to be a good moderate length from about 500 to 750 words. You're going to have 4 single passages, and then you're going to also have what we call a dual passage or a paired passage, where you're going to have 2 shorter readings that are somehow related that you will read together and then answer questions for both of those passages. I'm going to give you some strategies later on how to tackle the dual passage. The passage subject matter will always be the same, but the order can vary. Usually, both the PSAT and the SAT start with a piece of literature, so fiction. It can either be US, it can either be world literature, and it may be a contemporary piece, so modern, and it might be a piece from the early 20th century, 19th century, so your 1800s. Then there will be 2 history and social science passages. One will be, again, a modern piece, and the other will be a historical piece. And then there will be 2 science passages, and those are usually both contemporary. The reading level can be anywhere from 9th grade through 1st year of college, and the passages are adapted from previously published sources. And then we've got the breakdown of the questions. So there's 47 questions, so you're going to get 9 to 10 questions per passage. And the question types are going to be 10 words in context, 10 command of evidence, and then you're going to get some of those cross-sectional scores that we looked at a little early, where you'll analyze history and social studies, and you'll also have analysis and science. There's also going to be 1 literature passage. So this literature passage is typically the first passage on your on your PSAT, and it's going to be a literary excerpt that tells a story or recounts an event or experience. And it can be classic or contemporary. Most students tend to enjoy the contemporary piece, sometimes find the classic piece a little bit more challenging. There are let's see, then we got the other genre, which are going to be your history and social science passages. These are going to be a description of a historical trend or event, including the author's interpretation. So you might see a piece about government, you might see a piece about social sciences. So there's some so there will be some contemporary economics as well too. So there'll be a contemporary piece. And then there'll be selections from the US founding documents and the Great Global Conversation. There'll be informational graphics in one of the passage. And typically for the dual passage or the paired passage, this can be the science or the history social science. The Great Global Conversation is that dreaded history passage. This is where you could read a piece written by Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, maybe a more modern contemporary writer like John F. Kennedy. And then the contemporary pieces might focus on geography, law, political science, psychology, and sociology. There are also going to be 2 science passages. And the 2 science passages will have information and concepts from natural sciences that you have studied in school. The good news is that you don't need to have any scientific background. If it's central to understanding the passage, scientific terminology will be explained. So you don't need to worry about understanding physics or astronomy or anything in order to understand the passage. It's still a reading test. You will see some informational graphics in each passage, and here is where the dual passage will be either a historical piece, one of your social science pieces, or it'll be a science piece. As far as the passage sequence goes, the passages don't progressively increase in difficulty. although most students that I've worked with tend to find the history passage, so that primary source, that great global conversation, to be probably the hardest of the 5, with the literature passage sometimes also being a little bit challenging. The questions typically will follow the sequence of the passage. So sometimes they'll have line numbers, sometimes they won't, but they generally will follow the passage in order from start to finish. Except for a couple of questions that we'll look at a little bit more closely. The command of evidence questions, which are a 2-part question. And then usually any of the main idea and whole passage questions will also come out of order. And they typically are your first or second question of your 9 to 10 questions that you're going to see per passage. All right, so we're going to look at a couple of the 2 of the most commonly tested types of questions. And the first one, I think, is the most difficult. And so each of your passages that you're going to get of your 5 reading passages, you're going to have 2 command of evidence questions in every passage that ask for evidence for your answer. So let's look at what that looks like. So we'll start first of all with the strategies. When you start reading your passages, you are going to begin by looking at your questions. You're going to use your questions to guide your reading. And as you're previewing your questions, and we're going to try this later tonight when you do a practice passage, first what you're going to do is go through the questions before you start reading, and you're going to mark each command of evidence pair. I'll show you what they look like in just a minute. And then you'll read the passage. And as you answer the questions, when you get to a marked command of evidence pair, you'll read the first question, but not the answer choices. And then you'll read the line numbers listed in the second question and look for the answer in the first question.
Put that on the left bar. Can you put that in the left bar?
Hello?
Can you hear me? What?
All right. So let's look at these types of command of evidence questions. All right, so let's look at a sample one here. All right, so we've got number 32. By referring to country gentlemen, lines 22 through 23, the author paints the life of something. Then I'm going to look at question 33, which asks me which choice provides the best evidence for the answer to the previous question. All right, so let's look at this pair here. All right, so first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the A question, so question 32. By referring to country gentlemen, so that's my key word, then I'm going to come over to the text and find that key word in lines 22 through 23. So now I get a sense of where this question is appearing in the reading. Now what I want to do is I want to find out, what does country gentleman mean in context of this part of the passage? So before I even look at the answer choices for question 32, I am going to go through and read the line numbers for answers for question 33. So I'll start with lines 10 through 11, and I read through those, and I realize, well, that isn't really giving me much information about what it means to be a country gentleman. Process of elimination, I'm going to get rid of it. Then I'm going to look at the next group of lines. Universal respect enabled him to carry himself in right royal fashion. And so I'll look at that one, think about if it matches country gentleman, and it doesn't, so I'm going to get rid of it. Now I'm going to consider this section. During the 4 years since his puppyhood, he had lived the life of a sated aristocrat. He had a fine pride in himself. So I know I read a little bit beyond the line, but this is giving me some information about life. Okay, life of a sated aristocrat. Does that mean the same thing as a country gentleman? It probably does. So notice I'm leaving a thinking trail for myself, but always want to consider those remaining lines. So I want to look at lines 23 through 24. I read them briefly. I realize, okay, those don't really have anything to do with what it means to be a country gentleman, but he had lived the life of a sated aristocrat. Sounds pretty good. So I feel confident that that's going to be my answer choice. Now what I want to do is I want to make my match. So I've got sated aristocrat. What does that mean, really? Well, I know what an aristocrat means. And I know the aristocrat is someone who is a, nobility, probably leads a very comfortable life. So then I'm going to look at my answer choices for 32 and determine which of those answer choices match that idea of being an aristocrat. So I pick out good living. So he had lived the life of a sated aristocrat. That is going to be my best answer choice there. Sometimes the command of evidence questions, and this is nice, you don't have to deal with a pair of questions. Here, they're going to ask you the question, they're going to ask you question A, and you just have to find the support for it. So which choice best supports the idea that Buck was attracted to the call of the wild? So I'm going to do the same thing. Why was he attracted to the call of the wild? That's my key word. Now I'm going to go through and read through each of these sections of lines and determine which one best explains why he was attracted to this call. Same thing, I'll go back lines 10 through 11. It talks about his father, so that probably doesn't have anything to do with it. I'll get rid of it. Line 17 through 18 is talking about good living. That probably doesn't have to do anything with a call of the wild, of living outdoors. So I'll get rid of that. I've got my other answer choice again that we just looked at about good living, the life of an aristocrat, probably not the call of a wild. And so now I'm left with answer choice D. Time permitting, I always want to check and make sure that those lines make sense. Hunting and kindred outdoor delights. Yeah, that sounds like something that Buck, being attracted to the call of the wild, would be interested in. I'll double check it. It sounds good. That's going to be my answer choice. And then I'll move on to the next question. All right, so those are techniques for the command of evidence questions. So just always identify them. They're typically in pairs. Read the first question, find the answer within the answer choices of the second question, and then go back and make your match so you can answer the first question. Now we're going to move on to words in context questions. So this is the vocabulary in context. Within each passage, you're always going to find two questions that will ask you to define a word or phrase as used by the author in the context of the passage. And the words are typically familiar. You've probably seen them in your textbooks, in the readings that you've done for your English and social science and math and history courses. But there'll be upper level words, but they won't be words that are completely unusual. Another thing that the SAT and PSAT test makers like to do is they like to test familiar words with multiple meanings. So if you look at the words here, for instance, flag, we can think of the word flag as a noun, right? The American flag. We can also think of the flag as a verb, to flag a taxi cab, to wave something down. So oftentimes they will give you words that have multiple meanings, and just a little tip there, it's seldom that first dictionary meaning. It's usually going to be a secondary or tertiary meaning. So let's look at what this might look like on the PSAT. So we see our question as it's used in line 22. The word obscure most nearly means. And then I want to go ahead and I want to think about, okay, so how am I going to answer this question? I've got this word obscure. Let's say I've heard of it, but I'm not 100% sure of its definition. And so then what I'm going to do is take a look at how the word appears in context. So if I'm looking at line 22, I might want to read a little bit before, I might want to read a little bit after, because the test makers like to embed clues before or after the word, and seldom do they embed them on the same line. Another tip that's helpful is to reread the sentence, but substitute your own best word for the vocabulary word or phrase. And sometimes you can do that. You could find your own word and find a match in the answer choices. And then by using your own word, you can go ahead and figure out, okay, which words that they're giving me for an answer choice wouldn't make sense and which ones might make sense. And then I can use process of elimination and get rid of the words that I wouldn't use. So let's go back to this question here. So as it's used in line 22, the word obscure most nearly means, so I come over and I look at this sentence. So in a remarkable show of endurance, the senator spoke for 7 consecutive hours without stop, salting his filibuster with references to obscure coal mining practices that ceased long ago to be viable in the West Virginia mountains. So I'm getting a sense, okay, he's talking about something that's no longer viable. So which of those definitions of obscure is best going to work here? So I find it in context. And then I start thinking about, well, faint doesn't work there. If I tried to substitute in faint, that doesn't make sense with the sentence. Same with hidden. Nothing is hidden away. Dim and faint are similar, talking about light, even color even. So we're not talking about, you know, the ability to see coal mining practices. And again, process of elimination, I can feel pretty confident that little known is going to be the best answer choice because that's the one I haven't ruled out. So I'll circle that one and move on. All right. Something else that you're going to see on the PSAT are informational graphics. So some form of visual text. They will appear on one science passage and one history and social studies passage. And they can include tables, graphs, charts. You may even see a map. And you're asked 2 different types of questions. The first type of question is just going to ask you to simply interpret the graph. The other is going to ask you to synthesize the information on the graph with what you have just read in the text. And the good news is the graphs, the visual text, the questions for those tend to come at the very end. So they will be the final questions for the passage. So you won't see them first or mixed in the middle. So here's what something might look like here. So if you look at the 2 samples, we see this is an essay about regional transportation, probably one of those contemporary social sciences. We see, you know, the graph there about mode of transportation to the New York Financial District Office. And then we're going to see 2 questions. Question 44 merely asks me to read and interpret the graph. Which choice is supported by the data in the graph? The second one is going to ask me the data in the graph best supports which of the following ideas in the text. So usually what these questions are asking you to do are to synthesize, to compare, contrast the main idea in the essay with the information in the graph. And so for question 44, my answer choice is going to be A, because this is going to be the one that best expresses what I'm seeing visually. Now for question 45, of course, if you were taking this on the real PSAT, you would have already finished this essay, so you'd have a better idea of what the main idea would be. But for this one, I'm going to select answer choice B, the rebuilt subway station increased access to lower Manhattan. If I go back and look in my text here, they start talking about significant, right around line 40, significant impact on the change in commuter movement throughout lower Manhattan. And then I could see, you know, how the subway was the preferred mode of transportation to the financial district office. Reading test directions. These will be the same on this slide on your practice PSAT that you're starting working on this evening, and they will be the same when you do take the test. So get comfortable with them now. They will not change between now and the actual test. And once you know them, as long as you know them, you don't need to waste time reading them. They will not change. So check them out now. Take a look at them on the PSAT that you downloaded us for doing practice later on. They will not change. And a few more reading tips. Positive attitude really works. Honestly, many of these passages are very boring. Some can be even a little bit intimidating or confusing, like the history passage. But if you go in with a good attitude, a positive attitude, and you tell yourself, you know, this is going to be interesting, I might learn something interesting, it can help you stay awake and engaged. And honestly, the best way to get better at reading, your English teachers will say this to you, is to read more and read regularly. That's really the best way to practice and get comfortable with reading complex texts, in addition to the reading that you do for school. Always be an active reader. Read with your pencil. It helps you stay awake, and it also helps your mind, your brain, engage with the text. So you're underlining key words, you're circling important nouns or other trigger words, you're using your pencil point maybe to draw a little line as you read through the text. And then you're at the end of each paragraph, quickly write a 1 or 2 word summary. Is this a main idea? Is it a problem? Is it a purpose? Has there been a change? Just something to help you stay engaged and remember what you're reading. Always search for evidence. As I said earlier in the presentation, most of the reading questions are presented in the order corresponding to the passage line numbers. And about half the questions refer to specific line numbers, which can help reduce the reading to small bite-sized chunks. So this is going to be the first reading strategy that I'm going to go over, and I'm going to talk about a couple others at the end. And this is using the line numbers to break your reading into smaller chunks. So rather than starting out and just trying to read an entire passage and try to remember what you just read, you're going to use those questions, those line numbers in the questions to help guide your reading. So here's what it's going to look like. All right, so first of all, you're always going to read the introduction to the passage. It's the smaller font, and it'll usually give you the publication date, maybe some key information about the characters, who the author was. So you read that information. Then you're going to come over to the questions. So you'll read question 1. Does the question contain a line number? If it doesn't, which likely it won't, since most of the time question 1 and question 2 are going to be your main idea questions, you're going to skip that question, you'll mark it, circle it, and then you're going to come back to it later. You'll read the next question. Oh, question 2 is asking me about lines 1 through 15. Great. So I have a line number. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow the steps going over to the yes box. I'll underline my key words in the question so I know and remember what I'm looking for. Don't worry about the answer choices. I'm going to head for the reference text in the passage and mark it. And then I'm going to read that chunk of passage. And I'm going to read, so that was my first line number text, and it told me the question was about lines 1 through 15. Great. I'm going to read lines 1 through 15, and then I'm going to come back and answer the question. And I'm going to continue to repeat that cycle until I get through all 9, 10, 11 questions of that passage. And that will break a long 500 to 750 word passage into shorter, manageable reading chunks. The command of evidence questions, as we talked about earlier, typically don't follow the order of the passage. So like the main idea questions, leave those for the end. Do the line number questions and read in chunks, and then come back and do your command of evidence and main idea questions. When you are answering the line number questions, is predict the correct answer without peeking at the choices. And usually, just like how we were talking about some of the vocabulary and context, if you've got the right idea in mind, many times you can find a match with those answer choices offered. You'll go through, and of course you're moving at a nice steady pace here, and review all the answer choices. There'll be a few that you'll know right away make no sense. Get rid of those. There might be one that you're not sure of. Put a little question mark next to it. Oh, this question I know and I feel pretty confident about. I've got the correct answer choice. I'll check that off and go ahead and make sure I mark it correctly on my bubble sheet. Power of elimination is a great strategy. Sometimes on some of the harder questions, sometimes on the main idea questions I found especially, it's easier to identify the incorrect answers than it is to find the right answer. So use that power of elimination wisely, and many times you'll be left with the correct answer choice, and you won't even have to overthink it because you know I can make a case for the wrong ones, so this has to be the right one. Of course, going back to that very, very first strategy we talked about at the beginning, guess on any question you can't answer. And then for the non-line number questions, these are going to be the ones where you have the main idea, text features, text structures, so those whole passage questions. The graph questions, those will typically come at the very end. They'll be the last few questions on this section. And then sometimes you're going to get character description on the literature passage, so there won't be a specific line number, but at this point you read the entire passage, so you should have a pretty good idea of what the character is like. We'll talk about the paired passages later, but this is the compare and contrast. How do these two paired passages have some sort of relationship? For answering the non-line number questions, read the question, go back in the text to where you think you might find the answers, and then follow the same strategies you use for the line number. Make your own prediction, get rid of any wrong answer choices, use power of elimination to find the right answer. And of course, if you feel confident, always mark that right answer and move on. Many times it's easier to leave the main idea question for last. It's typically the first, second question. Circle it and come back to it at the end after you've done all the other questions and you feel pretty confident that you know what the passage is about. And of course, always guess, educated guessing being the preferred. Here's an alternative reading strategy that works for students that may not be comfortable breaking up the text into smaller chunks. You're going to do the same thing that you did, how you started the chunk reading method. You'll start out by reading that introductory information. Then you're going to come over to the questions, read all the questions first. You may want to mark up any line numbers that you notice in the text. Then you'll read the passage in its entirety. And then while you're reading, making sure you go through and read the passage actively. So you're, making your little check marks, you're writing your summaries, you're keeping track of what you read. And then you'll follow the same strategies that you did with the other sorts of questions, making sure the other strategy: predict, review and mark answer choices, and use power of elimination. Return to the passage to find justification for your answer, and then guess on any questions that you cannot answer. All right, so now it is your turn to try a practice reading. So let me give you the directions here. So you should have downloaded a practice PSAT. It was available in the email. It's also under the download. So if you look on the Go To webinar, you should see the downloads and you should see a sample PSAT. And so what you want to do here in the front of it will say 2015 practice test number 1. And you want to turn to page 2 of the downloaded practice PSAT. So this is going to be the first reading section. We're only going to do one reading passage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 12 minutes to read the first passage and answer its 9 questions. There's no need to go on after. We're just going to focus on the first passage for reading. You may use the answer sheet, which is at the end of the downloaded test. So that's your Bubbles sheet, your Scantron sheet, to record your answers. During the 12 minutes, try not to take any breaks. Remember to mark up the questions and passage as you read and answer the questions. And I'm going to be back in 12 minutes to review the correct answers. Before I go though, hold on one second, don't start yet. I think I've got a couple questions. I just want to make sure that I can see if anyone has any questions at all. Let me just check here. Oh, here we go, questions. Let me just check and see those. It looks like I don't have any new ones. So let's see. Yes, I don't need you. So Karina has a question. Do you need us to print the PSAT that we were told to download prior to this seminar? You don't need to print it. You could certainly do it online. It might be a little easier to practice the strategies that we just went over as far as marking up the test. So if you do have a printed copy, then you can use that. Let me just check that. Let's see. Are there any questions after the webinar, Michael? I will try to get to some. We'll see how much time we have at the end, so I can let you guys go as close to 7:30 as possible. But certainly, I'll definitely try to make some time for you, time for questions at the end. All right. So let me go ahead and let me just go back in here. So everyone should be open to page 2 on their PSAT on their reading section. Let me go ahead here. I'm going to start this timer in just 1 second. You're going to see the yellow circle gradually go to blue, and that will mark 12 minutes. I am going to go mute for the next 12 minutes to give you guys the opportunity, and you're going to be to answer questions 1 through 9. So you're going to be focusing on passage 1, and you can go ahead and get started. All right, so time is up. So let's go ahead and let's review the reading passage questions. And I'll also talk about some of the different types of questions that we're seeing. So now that we've talked about quite a number of questions, you know what they look like, and also any tips to help find them. So you'll notice right here, okay, so we've got question 1, main purpose of the passage. So notice my whole passage question is actually my very first question. If I read through this literature, this sample from Jane Austen, and I wasn't sure what was going on, this would be a good question to save to the end. So question 1, the main purpose of the passage is to A, describe a main character and a significant change in her life. So that would be my correct answer choice. Again, if you weren't sure about this one, read the passage as a whole, answer the other questions, and then come back to this one. All right, question 2. If I'm going to do my chunk reading, this is a great one to start because I just have to read lines 1 through 14 and then answer the question. So this is which choice best summarized the first 2 paragraphs of the passage? And this is going to be A. Even though a character loses a parent at an early age, she is happily raised in a loving home. And they talk about actually line 2, she's in a comfortable home and has a happy disposition. So number 2 is A. Question 3 is actually part of our first set of paired questions, our command of evidence questions. So for this one, I'm going to read question 3 first. Then I'm going to look at the answer choices for question 4, and then answer question 4, and then go back and answer question 3. Since I'm not seeing them together, I'm going to give you the answers for them separately. So the narrator indicates that the particular nature of Emma's upbringing resulted in her being B, self-satisfied. And question 4, which choice provides the best evidence for the answer to the previous question? And this is going to be C, lines 28 through 32. And in this selection, it talks about how she thinks a little too well of herself. So that's my evidence and my support for her feeling self-satisfied. So 3 is B, 4 is C. 5 is vocabulary in context. So I'll look at that word, perhaps try subbing in a word of my own. And then I want to think about which of those words make sense within the context. So the answer for number 5 is going to be C, guided. So talking about Miss Taylor's judgment, but Emma was chiefly directed by her own, or guided by her own. Number 6 is my second vocabulary in context question. And notice how we have this word want. And you can think about this as a classic word with multiple meaning, because usually if we want something, we desire something, right? Which would be answer choice A. But here, she's missing her governess. So 6 is going to be B, lack. She's missing something. So she wants for it, she lacks for it. So 6 is B. Number 7 and 8, here we have them together, my second command of evidence questions, my second set of paired questions. So I look at number 7, it can most reasonably be inferred that after Miss Taylor married, she had something. Okay, so what happened? Now I'm going to come over to question 8. I'm going to review those 4 answer choices, look at those lines, and figure out what possibly happened after Miss Taylor got married. So for here, my answer for 7 is going to be B, fewer interactions with Emma. And support for that, my text evidence is found for question 8 in answer choice D, in lines 73 through 79, where she talks about being alone. So answer for number 7, we've got B, and 8, we got D. And then my final question is kind of an interesting one. We have to look at this description in the very last chunk of text about Mr. Woodhouse. And it describes who he is, how he's older, and though he was beloved. We have to now think about what is this character like? And we have to read each of these little scenarios and figure out which one is in alignment with the description of Mr. Woodhouse's character. And for this one, it's going to be B. So 9 is going to be B. The differences between an older and younger friend are magnified because the younger one is more active and athletic. So let me just quickly reread the answers, just in case you missed any of them. So 1 is A, 2A, 3B, 4C, 5C, 6B, 7B, 8D, and 9B. And in the downloaded PSAT practice test that you have, there is an answer key in the back as well too. Just quickly before we move on to writing and language, the paired passage strategies. You will see one of these types of reading passages on your PSAT. You'll also see it on your SAT. Anyone taking the ACT, you'll also see this as well too. And here is where you have to read 2 passages, and they have a relationship with each other, and the questions, nicely enough, follow the order of the passages. So you'll see the questions for passage 1 appear first, then questions for passage 2, and then lastly, several questions, 3 or 4 typically, that ask you to compare and contrast what you've read in those 2 passages. And those are known as our synthesis questions. And the way I always like to remember it is hug or slug. Did the 2 passages that you just read somehow agree with each other, support each other, or did they offer contrasting views to the same situation? And again, what you're going to do is, what I always advise my students to do is break each of the 2 passages into almost like 2 little mini passage tests, right? So you follow the sleuth strategy for passage 1, answering your line number questions first, reading in chunks, then going back and answering any non-line number questions. And then you're going to do the same thing for passage 2. So break that passage into chunks and answer questions. Don't try to read both passages at once and then go and answer the questions. You won't remember them. And then you'll come to your synthesis questions, your hug or slug questions, and you'll answer them after you've read and answered questions for both passage 1 and passage 2. And then lastly, a quick good pacing strategy is don't look at the clock until the last passage in a section. So don't try to watch the clock too much, but once you reach passage 5, take a glance up, make sure you've got enough time. Now, if you happen to be running out of time on the reading section, a few quick tips for that. You can skim the passage rather than read it and answer the questions that you can. Or if you're really running out of time, don't even bother reading the passage and just try to answer the line number questions, since they usually have you focus on just a little bit of the text and not an entire section. Never leave a question unanswered, and there's no penalty for an incorrect answer. All right, moving on. So we're going to do the same thing for writing and language. I'll move a little bit more quickly just so we make sure I give you enough time to do the practice section that we're going to do following the strategies review, just like we did with the reading. So let's go briefly through the writing and language test. It is 35 minutes, and you are going to be answering grammar and rhetoric questions for 4 passages. The genres don't matter so much as they do on the reading. The style, you'll see some argumentative, you might see a narrative, some explanatory, informative. And then for each passage, you're going to get 11 questions for a total of 44. And the way that the questions are divided is you're going to get 24 expression of ideas, rhetoric, so making those editing revision choices, moving sentences around, combining sentences, picking the best word, and then 20 standard English conventions, so usage, mechanics, your commas, your semicolons, other punctuation, subject-verb agreement, pronoun antecedent agreement. And the question type is broken down as following. There are some words in context, so they do ask some vocab, and then other similar questions that you'll see on the reading, like on the reading. There are informational graphics as well too. Usually one of the passages will include some sort of visual text, and you'll have to answer questions about it as well. The passages don't progressively increase in difficulty, and the questions will follow the sequence of the passage typically. The only exception are the questions that ask you to consider rearranging the order of the author's text. Those may come at the end, but ask you to go back to earlier in the passage. Here are the writing and language test directions. They are the same here. They are the same on your practice test. They will be the same on next week's PSAT. So take some time before you take the test and review them, and just know that they won't change. So writing and language test strategy is a little different than reading. You don't want to start by reading the entire passage, which some of you might like to do on the reading, where you preview your questions first and then go back and read the passage. What you want to do here is attack the questions one at a time in order of appearance, and then reading through the passage until you get to the sentence or paragraph in question. You may have to read a little bit beyond that section, that underlined part of text, in order to figure out the answer. If you're asked to revise a part of a sentence, that part will be underlined. Like you did with reading vocabulary, figure out how you would best correct it, and then look for an answer choice that matches what you have in mind. If you're asked to combine a couple of sentences, same thing. Think about what would be the best, most effective way to combine sentences. Many times shorter is better, and then select the answer choice that matches your train of thought. Power of elimination is fantastic on the writing and language test, because you're going to get 4 different answer choices, and of course 3 of them are going to be incorrect. So sometimes it's easier to rule out the errors than it is to figure out which one is correct. So for instance, I'm looking at this one. Answer choice A, I've got a comma that doesn't belong. I know I can get rid of it. Like with C, I've got a verb tense. Why am I using future tense here? That doesn't make sense, so I can get rid of it. Same, D shares a similar error to a misplaced comma. I don't need it, it's unnecessary. So now I know by process of elimination, power of elimination, it has to be answer choice B. How do the answer choices differ? This can be another way, if you get stuck on one of these, to look at how the contrast, how the answer choices are different, and that can also sometimes help you find the correct answer. So let's look at this. So I look at my answer choices, and I've got their, her, its, and I also know answer choice A is another their. All right, I'm talking about one chef, so I know I can get rid of their, and I know a chef is a person, so I'm not going to refer to, in this instance, her as an it. So by looking at those differences, I can figure out pretty quickly that answer choice C must be my correct answer. Oftentimes, especially when they are testing conventions of the English language, so your punctuation marks especially, they like to have multiple errors. They like to test multiple errors at the same time. And instead of trying to tackle them all at once, make your life easy and try to get rid of each one. So let's look at the sample question here. So I've got the counties, S apostrophe, water commissioner, apostrophe S. So what the heck am I gonna do here? That's a lot of apostrophes. So I look at them. All right, I have to consider counties. Is this the right way? Is this the correct county? Should it be a plural possessive noun? I know that won't be the case, so I will get rid of answer choice A and B. So already I'm down to 2 answer choice. Now I'll look at commissioners, apostrophe S. Am I talking about a plural? Am I talking about a singular possessive noun? Well, answer choice D doesn't make any sense here. So now, by tackling one error at a time, okay, I've solved it. I know I'm talking about one county, apostrophe S, and I'm talking about a bunch of commissioners, not a singular possessive. Therefore, I can confidently choose answer choice C. To change or not to change, you'll see this offered as an answer choice pretty much for nearly all of them. And no change is correct about 1/4 of the time. Trust your grammar ear on this one. And here we've got the example, the school's literary magazine. So we've got all the poems submitted were chosen for their depth of feeling. I look at my answer choices. Oh yeah, well that one makes sense because it's referring to all the poems. Were and there makes sense. So I'm going to pick no change. If the phrase doesn't fit, you must delete. Delete is an attractive and usually correct answer choice especially when it's used to eliminate redundant or irrelevant statements. So the bag was free. I didn't have to pay for it. SAT does not like you repeating extra information or information twice. So I look at this. I didn't have to pay for it is already expressed in the bag was free. So therefore, I will select delete. Words in context questions. So you are going to get a little bit of vocabulary on your PSAT writing and language test. And here you want to choose the best word. So we've got, at first the rebels in the Central Mountains broadcast a clear, humble message to the island nation. They hinted that they only wanted to overthrow a deeply corrupt regime and replace it with a people's government. So I've got some answer choices. Which one best fits in this situation? So I first of all circle my word. I look at hinted. And I'm talking about a clear and humble message. So I'm not going to hint at a clear message. I'm going to be pretty clear about it so I can get rid of no change. Boasted is the opposite of humble, so I can get rid of answer choice D. Incited means to provoke and really doesn't make sense here. They're not trying to do, they're not doing any inciting here in the context of the sentence. So by process of elimination, claimed makes sense. And then lastly, we've got some final words. Guess, as you did with the reading. Don't move on to a new passage without making sure you've answered all the questions for the passage that you're working on. Remember that 2-pass approach that we talked about. Always check your bubble sheet, make sure your numbers are lined up with what you're answering. And remember, you can always write a big question mark beside any question and come back to it later if time permits. All right, so now, and actually we are doing great for time, so we're going to go a little bit over 7:30, but I do want to finish up. We are going to work on a writing and language section. All right, so what you want to do now is that downloaded practice PSAT, we just used the reading test. You want to turn to page 18. And at the top of page 18, you should see the number 2. You should see writing and language tests. You should see 35 minutes and 44 questions. And you should see questions 1 through 11 are based on the following passage, a nod to nodding off. So we're going to time this. You'll have 9 minutes to read the first passage and answer its 11 questions. Again, if you want to get comfortable using the bubble sheet and going back and forth between your booklet and the bubble sheet, you can use the answer sheet that was at the end of the downloaded test. Try not to take any breaks. Remember to mark up the questions and passage as you read and answer questions. That can be helpful as well, keeping you awake, remembering which questions you're guessing on, which ones you might want to go back to. I'm going to do the same thing that I did last time. I'm going to mute my mic. I'm going to come back in 9 minutes. You're going to see the same timer, and we'll review and correct the answers, and then we'll wrap things up for the evening. So good luck on this, and I'm going to go ahead and start the timer. All right, guys, so time is up. So let me go through and review the questions, and I'll point out some of the errors, and if there were any strategies that I didn't cover, I'll address them briefly. Question 1 is C. So this was that redundancy example that we looked at earlier. This one you didn't delete, but you chose answer choice C, which got rid of the yearly and the annually and just kept the annually. All right, question 2 is going to be D, primary causes of. So this is choosing the best word, or in this instance, words, and you'll notice that answer choice D is the one that maintains the most formal academic tone here. Number 3 is C, spends, and this is subject-verb agreement. Number 4 is D. So we want the comma after workers because that's ending the introductory dependent clause. And then managers is the subject of the next independent clause. So number 4 is D. Number 5 is one of these questions that asks you to rearrange the sentences in a paragraph. These are ones that are good to come back to later if they asked you to do something, you know, towards the middle of the paragraph, middle of the section, although they usually come at the end of the paragraph. For this one, you just have to go back and read. So you have to look at the sentence, you have to find sentence 3, and then figure out where it needs to be placed. And here for number 5, the best placement is after sentence 1. Sentence 1 introduces the fact that workers lack sleep because of work, and sentence 3 gives an explanation about the number of hours that Americans have spent working and how they have increase, making it hard for them to get sleep. So usually for these sorts of questions, you're looking for like set up an explanation. Sometimes you're looking for chronological order or order in a process. Here's another rhetoric type question. Do you add or do you remove a sentence? And so here you have to consider, you look at this detail, even 15-minute power naps improve alertness, creativity, and concentration. And 6 is going to be A, because they demonstrate that the benefits of napping can be gained without sacrificing large amounts of work time. The setup that this sort of question is similar from time to time. You usually get 2 yeses and 2 nos. You can usually figure out pretty quickly if you should keep or delete, add or remove, but then you have to read the reasons closely and make sure your justification is in alignment with the correct answer choice, or what you feel is the correct answer choice. Number 7, which choice provides a supporting example that reinforces the main point of the sentence? So I'll look back, so I see the portion of the sentence that's underlined, but I'll read a little bit before, kind of like what I did on my reading test as well too. And I'm looking at, oh, regular napping leads to long-term health benefits. So the detail that I think will be best supporting the long-term health benefits will be answer choice B, a lower risk of cardiovascular problems such as heart attack and stroke. Number 8 is going to be just the parallel structure here. So number 8 is going to be B, gently wake. So I notice that the other verbs in this sentence are block out, play soothing music, gently wake. Makes sense. So 8 is B. Number 9 is picking the correct preposition that goes best with the question, with the sentence. And here, these are good ones to trust your grammar ear. Number 9 is B. Number 10, way down at the bottom of the page, is going to be D, because we have that set up, not only, but also. So that's that correlative conjunction. And then number 11, is going to ask, the writer is going to ask us to find a good concluding sentence. So The writer wants a concluding sentence that restates the main argument of this passage. For this one, if I don't necessarily remember what's the main idea of the passage, I might go back and reread that first paragraph just to verify what I've been reading if I haven't really been paying attention to the content of the paragraph and have been passage and been more focused on correcting the errors. And so here I'm going to pick answer choice D. More businesses should follow their lead and embrace napping on the job. All right, let me just quickly read the answers one more time. 1C, 2D, 3C, 4D, 5C, 6A, 7B, 8B, 9B, 10D, and 11D. And you also have the answer key as well that's available in your download. All right, so we're coming to the end of tonight's webinar. Thank you all very much for hanging in there with me and listening and learning and practicing all these important strategies that'll be very helpful for you. If you would like further help, we are offering a 2-hour review session for $99. And you can go ahead and call to register at our centers, so whichever one is close to you. We also do Skype tutoring as well too. So if you are from a different, if you're not from our part of Florida, please reach out. We do Skype tutoring as well. Would certainly encourage you to finish up the PSAT that we did now, although hold off on the math because you will need the math for Thursday night's second part of the webinar when Eileen will be presenting math strategies and doing some practice with you all. Just a reminder that if you do want further PSAT, SAT, or ACT test prep, we offer private, we offer small group workshops. We will do virtual tutoring, and for our local students, we run an annual SAT workshop at Suncoast High School. It goes from January to March, and we get you prepped for our juniors who are taking that March SAT. For many students, that's their first SAT, and so it's a great opportunity to study and practice and practice and learn these strategies further. A few other things that we've got coming up. We do have a college admissions boot camp coming up in the summer of 2020. They're often offered in several locations. And so this is something that we will work with students to help you with, help you learn how to stand out on your applications, how to be your best at a college interview, what colleges are the best fit for you. We'll do personal writing conferences for essays and for resumes, give you the chance to work on your applications, and help you come up with a good application strategy to improve chances for admission. So this is an excellent workshop that we run during the summer, and it really helps students get behind those sometimes daunting college applications. And just again, thank you everyone for attending tonight, for asking good questions, and I wish you all the best on your PSAT. Don't forget Thursday night, we have our webinar 6 to 7:30 to practice math. And then in December, following the release of PSAT scores, we will be hosting 2 more webinars, one of which we will go over the PSAT that you have just taken, the one that you will take, and then we will also offer a webinar to help you explain and interpret your PSAT scores. So a lot of good stuff coming up. And once again, thank you very much. Here's our numbers at the bottom of the screen. scoreatthetop.com. And don't forget, we will be making a recording of this webinar available. So if you missed anything, we will have that available to you. So I want to thank you all for attending. Have a wonderful, wonderful evening. Good luck on your PSAT, and thank you. Have a nice evening. Goodbye.